What if the voices you hear are not just in your head, but a divine message calling you to greatness? Imagine being a young peasant girl, hearing the voices of saints, and believing with every fiber of your being that you're destined to change the course of history. This was the reality for Joan of Arc, a woman who rose from the humble fields of France to lead armies, challenge kings, and become a symbol of unwavering faith and courage. But were her visions truly from God, or was she simply a pawn in a dangerous political game? As Joan's destiny unfolded, she faced accusations of witchcraft, heresy, and deceit. Her trial would become one of the most controversial and heart-wrenching moments in history. Joan of Arc's story isn't just about battles and crowns. It's a story of faith, sacrifice, and the ultimate struggle between truth and manipulation. It's a journey that forces us to ask, what would you do if you believed your life's purpose came straight from the heavens? Don't miss this riveting exploration of Joan of Arc's visions. Was she divinely inspired, or a clever ruse? Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the truth behind one of history's most compelling figures. Make sure to hit that bell icon to never miss an unraveling of the mysteries that shaped our world. Joan of Arc was born in 1412 in the small rural village of Domremy, nestled along the Meuse River in northeastern France. She was the youngest of 5 children, born to Jacques d'Arc, a farmer, and Isabelle Romy. The family lived a modest life, bound to the land and deeply immersed in the Catholic faith that dominated the region. Joan's early years were shaped by the strict teachings of the Church, where she learned to read and write, though her formal education was limited. The village of Domremy was largely peaceful, tucked away in the countryside, and its people lived close to the land, cultivating crops and raising livestock. Despite the hard work and simplicity of village life, Joan was known for her devout nature and intense spiritual commitment. From a young age, she would often spend hours praying, attending Mass, and seeking solace in the quiet of the countryside. Her connection to God was unwavering, and she showed a deep sensitivity to the religious practices of her community. However, Joan's piety was often met with whispers from the villagers. Some claimed she was different, saying that she spoke of strange happenings and visions. While most dismissed these rumors as mere superstition, Joan herself believed something extraordinary was happening. There were moments when she heard whispers in the wind, voices that called her by name, urging her to take action. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the voices seemed to grow clearer over time, urging her to lead a life of divine purpose. She could not escape the overwhelming feeling that something greater was calling her. But at that point, she had no idea what it meant or what her role in this mysterious message might be. Joan's first true vision occurred when she was just 13 years old. It was a warm summer day, and she was alone in the fields near her home, tending to her father's sheep. As the sunlight filtered through the trees and the rustling of leaves filled the air, Joan found herself in a deep, reflective prayer. It was during this moment of solitude that the world around her seemed to shift. She was suddenly enveloped in an overwhelming sense of calm and awe, as if the very earth beneath her feet had stilled. In this stillness, Joan heard a voice, clear, strong, and unmistakable. It was a voice she had never heard before, but it felt familiar, as if it came from a place beyond this world. The voice spoke to her directly, calling her by name. "Joan, you are chosen." The voice identified itself as Saint Michael, the Archangel, and said that she was destined to save France from its English invaders. At first, Joan was terrified. Her heart raced, and doubt clouded her mind. How could she, a simple peasant girl with no military training or royal connections, possibly fulfill such a monumental task? But the voice was insistent and clear. "You will lead France to victory, and you will help crown Charles, the Dauphin, as the rightful king of France." Joan trembled in fear, both terrified by the vision and drawn to the power and clarity of the message. The voice urged her to take up arms, to leave the peaceful life she had known, and to fulfill the divine mission entrusted to her. At that moment, Joan was overwhelmed with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She was a young girl, inexperienced in the ways of war and far from the seat of power. How could she possibly accomplish this task? Yet, the voice was persistent, and it seemed to speak with an authority that left Joan no room for doubt. Her heart burned with an unfamiliar sense of purpose, but Joan was conflicted. She did not understand the full meaning of this divine calling. How could a peasant girl lead an army, let alone become the savior of her country? But deep within her, Joan felt an undeniable conviction. This was not a fleeting fantasy or an illusion. This was a calling. It was a divine message from a higher power, one that would set her life on a course she could not yet fully comprehend. For the first time, she felt as if she was part of something far greater than herself, a purpose that transcended the ordinary life she had known. In the days that followed, Joan sought solace in prayer, hoping for clarity and confirmation of the voice's message. She knew that what she had experienced was not a normal vision. It was powerful, unmistakable, and it lingered in her heart, refusing to be ignored. She was both terrified and emboldened by what she had heard, and it would be a long time before she fully understood the implications of her vision. But one thing was clear: Joan's life was no longer her own. She had been chosen for something far greater, and she could not turn away from the call, no matter how daunting it seemed. Joan's first reaction to the powerful voices calling her to action was not to immediately rise to her divine mission. She was a young girl, raised in a simple farming family, far from the intrigues of courts or battlefields. The magnitude of what she was being asked to do overwhelmed her, and she could not fathom how she, someone so ordinary, could fulfill such an extraordinary task. With fear and doubt consuming her, Joan sought the counsel of those around her, hoping for clarity. She confided in her family, her voice trembling as she described the visions she had experienced. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, was protective of her and skeptical of such wild claims. "The saints do not speak to girls like you," he would say, trying to dismiss her fears. Joan's mother, Isabel, was equally concerned but more pragmatic. She feared for her daughter's safety and well-being. "These visions are nothing but your imagination running wild," she told her. "A good girl like you should not be meddling with such matters." Joan also turned to the local priest, a man of deep faith and study. He listened to her in silence but dismissed her claims as a result of her youthful fantasies. "Girls of your age often imagine things. Do not let these thoughts distract you from your prayers and duties," he advised, offering no comfort or guidance. But Joan could not shake the overwhelming certainty that her visions were real. As the days passed, her experiences grew more intense. The voices became clearer, and new figures began to appear to her. Saint Catherine, the martyr of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret, a revered virgin saint, also spoke to her, urging her to press forward with her mission. Their presence added weight to Joan's belief that her purpose was divinely ordained. At this point, some villagers began to take notice of Joan's growing conviction. They no longer viewed her as merely a naive girl but began whispering about her potential. Was she truly the chosen one? Her visions, especially the arrival of such saintly figures, could not be ignored. But many were still skeptical, dismissing her as a mere peasant girl with an overactive imagination. Still, a few trusted friends and sympathetic souls began to encourage her. One of these was a local nobleman who, despite his own doubts, recognized that Joan might hold a rare fire of spirit and conviction. While initially dismissing her claims, he eventually began to take her more seriously when she described in vivid detail what the saints had told her. He suggested that Joan make her way to the court of Charles VII, the Dauphin of France, to seek the support of the king and prove her divine calling. Determined to fulfill her divine mission, Joan set out on her journey to the court of Charles VII. She knew that if her visions were real, she would be able to convince the king of her sincerity and her purpose. The journey was not easy for a young peasant girl, and many obstacles lay in her path. She faced uncertainty, isolation, and the skepticism of everyone she encountered. She had no wealth, no royal connections, and was perceived by many as just a simple farm girl with wild ideas. As Joan traveled toward the Dauphin's court, she often faced rejection and mockery. People laughed at her claims and warned her not to waste her time with such foolishness. Even the nobleman who had initially supported her was doubtful, wondering if this journey would be in vain. But Joan remained steadfast, driven by the belief that God was guiding her, no matter how many obstacles stood in her way. When Joan finally arrived at Charles VI's court, she was met with skepticism. The royal court, filled with nobles and advisors who lived in a world of politics and intrigue, was hardly inclined to believe the claims of a poor peasant girl. Charles, too, was initially dismissive. He had no reason to trust Joan, especially given the fact that the French army was losing badly to the English forces and morale was low. Yet there was something about Joan's presence that intrigued him. She spoke with such conviction, such belief in the divine message she had received, that Charles agreed to test her. The king had already heard of Joan's visions and the stories circulating about her, but he remained uncertain whether they were true or merely the fantasies of a young girl. To determine her authenticity, Charles instructed his advisors to conduct a series of interviews with Joan. The interviews were intense, with the interrogators trying to break her down, challenging her faith and her claims. Joan, however, remained unwavering in her conviction. She answered each question with clarity and conviction, her responses so full of faith and wisdom that even the most skeptical among the court began to wonder if she might indeed be speaking the truth. Her faith and bravery shone through in these interviews, and after passing a thorough religious examination, Joan was allowed to meet with Charles privately. In their meeting, she impressed the king with her certainty and her unyielding belief in her divine purpose. She spoke of her visions with such clarity and authority that Charles was moved. The king was not a man easily swayed, but Joan's presence was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Despite the doubts of his advisors, Charles ultimately decided to give Joan a chance. He presented her with a banner, an army's standard to carry into battle, and ordered that she be sent to the front lines to help lift the siege of Orleans, a key stronghold that could turn the tide of the war in favor of the French. Joan's resolve had paid off, and for the first time, she held the symbol of her divine mission in her hands. Her journey was just beginning, and she was determined to prove that she was not merely a peasant girl, but the chosen one sent to change the fate of France. In 1429, when Joan of Arc arrived at the siege of Orleans, the city was on the brink of collapse. The English had laid siege to the French stronghold for months, and the French forces were demoralized, weary from years of warfare and defeat. The mood in the French camp was grim, and the soldiers were on the verge of giving up. The fate of Orleans, a strategic city, seemed sealed in favor of the English, and the French crown's hopes for victory were dwindling. But Joan's arrival brought a spark of hope to the beleaguered French forces. When she appeared at the camp, she was not the ordinary figure one might expect. She wore armor and carried the banner of her divine mission, her faith unshaken. Word of her presence quickly spread, and soldiers began to gather around her, feeling an inexplicable surge of inspiration and determination. Joan's unwavering belief in her visions, her calls for victory, and her confidence in the divine message she had received electrified the troops. Joan wasted no time in taking charge. She met with commanders and offered bold, strategic suggestions for breaking the siege. Despite her lack of military experience, her instincts proved remarkably accurate. She urged the French forces to act swiftly, attacking the English positions and using surprise tactics to their advantage. Her leadership was fierce and uncompromising, and she pushed the soldiers to take risks they would not have dared otherwise. As the battle unfolded, Joan's presence on the battlefield seemed to embolden the troops. Her courage was unmatched. She led charges into the fray, rallying the soldiers with cries of divine victory. Her fervor was contagious, and for the first time in years, the French soldiers believed they could win. The English forces, caught off guard by the French resolve and Joan's presence, began to waver. The tide of battle turned, and the siege began to unravel. In just a few days, the French successfully broke the siege, lifting the English stranglehold on Orleans. The victory at Orleans was nothing short of miraculous. Joan had promised that it would come, and her words proved true. The news of the French victory spread like wildfire across the country, revitalizing the morale of the French people and giving them renewed hope in their ability to win the war. Joan, now seen as the divine messenger, was hailed as a hero. Her victory at Orleans became a turning point in the 100 Years' War, shifting the momentum in favor of France. Joan's influence on the battlefield and her faith in her mission had not only secured a military victory, but had also rekindled the spirit of the French resistance. Yet, as much as Joan's victory at Orleans inspired her supporters, it also deepened the skepticism of her critics. Though the siege had been broken, some in the French court and military still questioned whether Joan's visions were genuine or the product of political manipulation. Despite the victory, Joan's journey was far from over, and new challenges loomed on the horizon. With the momentum from Orleans behind her, Joan set her sights on another goal: the coronation of Charles VII as the rightful king of France. Following the victory, Joan convinced the Dauphin that it was time to press forward, rallying the French forces and marching toward Reims, where the traditional coronation of French kings was held. She urged Charles to claim his crown and solidify his position as king, as the English were still pressing hard against the French resistance. Charles VII, who had been deeply moved by Joan's faith and her military successes, was willing to follow her guidance. The path to Reims, however, was fraught with danger, as it passed through territories still held by the English. Despite the risk, Joan's resolve never wavered. She led the army with a sense of purpose, her banner flying high as a symbol of divine favor. The French forces, now buoyed by the successes at Orleans, followed Joan with renewed determination. When they reached Reims in July 1429, the city was taken with little resistance. Charles VII entered the cathedral, and, in a moment of triumph, Joan stood by his side as he was crowned King of France. The coronation was a powerful symbol of French unity and victory, and it marked a pivotal moment in the 100 Years' War. With the king now crowned, the French people had a powerful rallying figure, and the legitimacy of Charles VII was firmly established. Yet, even as the coronation was celebrated, doubts about Joan's true nature began to grow. There were whispers among the nobles, courtiers, and clergy that Joan's visions might not be as divine as she claimed. Some began to question whether she was truly guided by saints or simply an ambitious young woman used by political forces to rally the people behind Charles VII. Rumors spread that Joan might be a fraud, or even a puppet for the political machinations of the French court. Despite these doubts, Joan remained resolute. She believed in her divine mission and continued to support the French king with unwavering loyalty. However, the political intrigue surrounding her grew more complicated, and her future would soon take an unexpected and dangerous turn. As the war raged on, Joan would face challenges not just from the English but from those who once hailed her as a hero, setting the stage for her eventual fall from grace. Joan's rise to prominence had been meteoric, but her fate took a dark turn in 1430 during a failed military campaign. After leading the French forces to a string of victories, Joan's fortunes shifted when she was captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English. In a tragic turn of events, Joan was handed over to the English, who had long viewed her as a dangerous symbol of French resistance. Her capture was a devastating blow, both for the French army and for the morale of the people who had seen her as their savior. The English, eager to break the spirit of their most formidable opponent, wasted no time in accusing Joan of witchcraft, heresy, and cross-dressing, charges that were as politically motivated as they were religious. They claimed that Joan's behavior, her defiance of gender norms, and her insistence on carrying out her divine mission were acts of blasphemy. They sought to discredit her completely, to prove that she was nothing more than a deceiver who had exploited the religious fervor of the people. Joan was subjected to a grueling series of interrogations. She was locked in a prison, chained and isolated, while the English and their allies sought to break her resolve. In the face of intense psychological and physical pressure, Joan's faith remained unshaken. She continued to claim that her visions of saints like Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret were real and divinely inspired. Despite the constant threats of torture and the jeering accusations of her captors, Joan stood firm in her belief that her mission was of God. Her unwavering faith in her divine calling earned her respect from some quarters, but it also fueled the animosity of her enemies, who saw her as a dangerous threat to their power. Joan's capture marked the beginning of the end of her military career. As the English forces prepared to put her on trial, they made it clear that her survival was contingent on her recanting her claims of divine inspiration. Yet, Joan refused to abandon her beliefs, steadfastly maintaining that her visions were true and that she had been chosen by God to lead France to victory. Her strength and conviction would be tested in ways she had never imagined. In 1431, the trial of Joan of Arc began in the city of Rouen. The trial would not only decide her fate but would also determine whether she had truly been sent by God, or if she was a fraud who had manipulated her followers for personal gain. The court, consisting mostly of English and Burgundian officials, accused Joan of a litany of crimes, with the central question being whether her visions were authentic or a cleverly constructed ruse. The prosecution focused on two primary accusations: her claims of divine guidance and her defiance of church and societal norms, particularly her insistence on wearing male clothing. Joan's cross-dressing was seen as a symbolic act of rebellion, and her critics used it to suggest that she was not only a heretic but also a threat to the established order of the church and the monarchy. The English were determined to frame Joan as a deluded fanatic at best or a manipulative schemer at worst. Throughout the trial, Joan was subjected to intense interrogation. Her inquisitors sought to break her down, using psychological pressure, theological arguments, and even promises of mercy if she confessed to her supposed sins. They tried to manipulate her words, twisting her statements to make her appear guilty of heresy. Despite the overwhelming odds against her, Joan maintained her composure and refused to recant her beliefs. She insisted that her visions had come from God, not from any earthly source, and she boldly declared that she had been commanded to serve the divine will in her quest to save France. The trial was designed to be both a political and religious spectacle. Joan's accusers sought not only to destroy her but also to undermine the legitimacy of her entire mission. By labeling her a heretic and a witch, they aimed to erase her from history as a symbol of hope for the French people. But Joan remained resolute, even in the face of dire threats. Her courage and faith in the face of overwhelming adversity made her a martyr in the eyes of her supporters. Despite her unwavering spirit, the court was determined to find Joan guilty. The trial dragged on for weeks, and the pressure mounted as Joan's fate hung in the balance. The English were desperate for a confession, and they relentlessly pushed her to renounce her visions and her claims of divine guidance. Joan, however, stood firm in her faith, refusing to betray the truth she had known from the beginning. Her trial became a battle of wills, with Joan fighting not just for her life but for the preservation of her beliefs. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc met her tragic fate. After a year of imprisonment, trial, and relentless questioning, she was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. The day of her execution was a grim and somber one, as thousands gathered to witness the death of the young woman who had once been hailed as France's savior. Her accusers had stripped her of all dignity, branding her a heretic and a witch. But Joan, in her final moments, remained unbroken. As the flames began to rise around her, Joan's voice rang out one last time. She called upon the names of the saints who had guided her throughout her journey: Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. Her faith was unwavering as the flames engulfed her, and she continued to reaffirm that her visions were real, that she had been sent by God to fulfill a divine purpose. Her final words were a testament to her unshakable belief in the divine mission she had received. Joan's death marked the end of an extraordinary chapter in French history, but it also gave rise to something even more powerful: her legacy. In the years following her death, her name became synonymous with courage, faith, and self-sacrifice. The French, having lost their courageous heroine, were left with an enduring symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The belief in Joan's divine mission only grew stronger, and the message of her life, her commitment to fighting for what she believed in, no matter the personal cost, resonated deeply with the people. Today, Joan of Arc is remembered not just as a military leader or a martyr, but as a symbol of unwavering conviction in the face of adversity. Monuments and statues dedicated to her can be found around the world, and her story continues to inspire people of all faiths and backgrounds. She is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are those who rise above, whose courage and conviction can change the course of history. The life of Joan of Arc raises one of the most enduring questions in history. Was she truly a divine messenger sent by God, or was she simply a young woman with a keen understanding of the political and religious currents of her time? The answer, perhaps, is elusive. Joan's visions were vivid and compelling, and she spoke with an unwavering certainty that convinced many that she had been chosen by God to lead France out of its dire straits. She claimed to have received instructions from saints, and her military successes against the English gave her an almost mythical status among the French. But for some, Joan's story is not so clear-cut. Critics have long argued that her visions could have been the result of a variety of factors: mental illness, manipulation, or even a clever understanding of the political environment in which she lived. Some scholars suggest that Joan was not driven by divine inspiration but by a deep desire to change the course of history, a desire that led her to use the language of religion to gain the support of the people and the monarchy. In this view, her visions could be seen as a strategic tool, used to unite the French people and bolster Charles VII's claim to the throne. Yet, despite these doubts, the evidence of Joan's courage, her unshakable faith, and her ultimate sacrifice cannot be denied. Regardless of the source of her visions, her impact on the course of history is undeniable. Her story has been told and retold for centuries, inspiring countless individuals to pursue their own visions of truth and justice, no matter the cost. The debate over Joan's authenticity, whether she was a true messenger of God or a clever strategist, continues to this day. But for many, the mystery surrounding her life only adds to her legend. Her courage and dedication to her beliefs, whether divine or not, elevate her to the status of a hero, someone who shaped the course of history and left behind a legacy that continues to inspire. Ultimately, the question of whether Joan was truly a divine messenger or a clever ruse may never be answered definitively. But perhaps, in the end, the most important aspect of her legacy is the way her life and death continue to resonate with people, stirring up questions of faith, courage, and the power of belief in shaping the world around us. Joan of Arc, whether divine or human, will forever be remembered as a symbol of what it means to stand firm in the face of adversity and to fight for a cause that transcends one's own life. If you found Joan's story as captivating as we did, make sure to like, share, and comment below. What do you think? Was her divine mission real, or was it all part of a greater political strategy? And don't forget to subscribe to Dark Mystery for more shocking truths, untold stories, and the legends that continue to haunt our past. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep seeking the truth in the shadows.